Hi, Everett.
Hi, B.
How are you doing today?
Very good, thank you.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for your willingness to participate in this little short interview. As most of you know, February is Black History Month, and today we are here to discuss what that means to Everett, more specifically. So what does Black History Month mean to you?
You know what? When you first asked me to participate in this Black History Month, I immediately went on to the second question and looked at some of the other questions, because Black History Month, to me, was something you celebrate. It's, we're celebrating it now. We're talking about it now.
Yeah.
But then I went back to the question and thought about it. And it's actually a very interesting question.
Oh.
It's a deep question. Because for me, Black history is something that I celebrate, something that I participate in. But it's really not about me, because just being a white guy, Western European background, it's something that somebody else celebrates, because obviously I'm not black.
Right.
But the more I thought about it, it's an interesting question, because you're celebrating a color.
Right.
There's black, and then there's the word history comes into the Black history. So it sounds like we're celebrating historical events and the past, just kind of focused on the black. And so when I thought about that, it's interesting where you're kind of looking at a different culture, at a different people in a different time, and celebrating them. But we're also celebrating the blacks of today. So, it's what are we actually celebrating is the question that I asked myself. It's like,
did you find an answer to that question?
I think it's kind of in some ways all of the above. And even, it's kind of a strange thing, just my background and who I am and my own color. In some ways it comes across, I have a certain level of guilt associated with it. Even though I haven't necessarily done anything, but I guess my white ancestry, my past of color, has suppressed the black, those with black color in the past. So, for me, when I grew up, I really didn't see color. To me, just my culture and where I grew up in downtown Hamilton, I grew up with all different people of ethnic backgrounds, different colors, different races. But the older I got, the more I read about it, the more I understand why we celebrate it, because there is just so much that has happened in the past, and even right here in our little town of Ancaster, Ontario, Canada, we have that.
You mentioned that you were a white male from a European background. So seeing what you are now and seeing what your ancestors did in the past, how do you think you would have reacted, or what kind of a man would you have been? Would you have owned slaves if you lived during that time? What are some of the moral questions you ask yourself, or the realities that you have to acknowledge?
That's a loaded question. That's a big question. It's tough. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to say, no, I would have never done that, because I think in the culture, in that time, I mean, I even think today, so what are we doing today that, 100 years from now or 200 years from now, that, the generations that follow are going to look at us and thinking, what were you thinking? Why did you do that?
Right.
If I put myself, say, if I owned a plantation down in Little Rock, Arkansas, would I have owned slaves? And if I had that type of plantation, who would I have been? I'm going to say I most likely would have had slaves. I would have participated in that culture, because to me, I think it was just an assumption. It was just a given. Even though it scares me to say what I just said, but I would have hoped I would have still been of the same disposition, where I think I would have been a decent plantation owner. or a different, like decent, owner of slaves, I'm hoping I would have still thought of the blacks as humans, like just as humans. So I would have given them opportunity to grow, an opportunity to learn, and different opportunities to grow in themselves. That's what I'm thinking I would have been. I would have hoped I would have been. I consider myself fairly progressive today. So if the changes were taking place, that I would have been one of those at the front end of the change when it did happen. So it really depends on. But again, I also kind of thinking about that and thinking about where we are today is what are you and I I know we're talking Black history, but what are we today culturally participating in that we're gonna we're gonna look back and say, what were we thinking?
Right.
That's really the short answer to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a very tough question, and it kind of forces you to be vulnerable and honest. So I really appreciate you being honest.